Hi, welcome back to Witchy Goddess Reborn. In my previous episode, I started sharing what my life was like as Jehovah's Witness teen and how the fear, rules and the pressure shaped everything. So today I actually want to tell you about what happened when I made a personal choice at age 18. A choice that cost me my community, my social life and my dignity. I chose to get married to someone who was not a baptized Jehovah's Witness, at least at the time. So someone who is referred to as a worldly person, because anyone who's not a baptized Jehovah's Witness, even if they are studying with witnesses, that's what they're called. They're called worldly. I was 18, young, idealistic, and already deeply conditioned. But just before my 18th birthday, I met someone, fell in love, who was someone who was outside of the organisation, someone who wasn't even attending meetings, so he was not baptised. And according to Jehovah's Witness rules, this, even though it's not technically forbidden, it is very strongly discouraged and extremely looked down upon. It's not something you will find out whilst you're having a Bible study either. They don't really bring it up, so quite deceitful, really. It took me literally years before I even learned such a thing existed in the organisation, because I just found out it was called being disobedient. Still, at the time, I believed love should matter more than rules, so I made a choice. I got married. And the punishment came very quickly, silently but quickly. And I learnt what marking and soft shunning was. Never heard of it before. I'd only been baptised for 4 years. I was summoned by the elders more than on one occasion, asking me at first to break off the engagement, which just went over my head. And when I did not, I was told that the congregation has to be warned of such disobedience, and I was to be marked. It sounds like a stain, and pretty much is. There was no formal announcement, no judicial committee, no disfellowshipping, because it didn't warrant disfellowshipping, but it did warrant a marking talk, which is basically a passive-aggressive speech from the platform by an elder aimed directly at the person, me, without actually using my name. But of course, everyone knew it was about me. And the talk with the message of do not associate with her, or people such like me. She's spiritually weak, and she's an example of what not to do. And I actually sat in the audience, when that was done. So from that point on, I was soft shunned. People who once smiled at me turned away. Invitations stopped. Conversations vanished. I became invisible inside the very congregation that used to praise my spiritual progress. And even during the preaching events, when people would have a coffee break, no one even wanted to sit in a car with me. It was like I had a sort of a contagion. I guess to them, I was spiritually sick. I cannot overstate the impact of that kind of treatment on an 18-year-old girl. The psychological pain of being publicly judged and privately punished, that really affects you. It runs deep. You're not quite disfellowshipped, but you're being emotionally erased. And let's say for what it is, it's emotional abuse. disguised as spiritual discipline. And of course, my self-worth plummeted. I felt extremely humiliated. I was so ashamed, and just abandoned on every level. I felt, and I was, an outcast. And because I had already been isolated away by Jehovah's Witnesses from having friends outside the organisation, you know, because they don't want you mixing with anybody who isn't baptised witness. And even then, you know, I found that I did not fit anywhere. So at the time, my husband, or my ex-husband, was not a Jehovah's Witness. And his family, like, whilst they weren't outwardly hostile, they obviously didn't like the fact that I was a Jehovah's Witness and influencing, you know, my then husband. And all of that did not end even when, I think about 6 years later or so, my then husband actually did become a baptized Jehovah's Witness, probably more for my sake than anything else. But it was like my reputation was forever tainted. And regardless of how many hours I preached, or if I did not miss any meetings, you know, or tried to answer up, I was just sidelined and always seen as spiritually weak. Didn't matter how many years had gone. So let's call it for what it is. Bullying and control. Even though Jehovah's Witnesses call it loving discipline, I think it's very far from loving. But, you know, when your entire community turns cold on you for one decision and you're publicly shamed from the platform, it's bullying. It's just bullying. It's psychological control and torture designed to force obedience. I know it's not just Jehovah's Witnesses who do that. You know, they use shame as a weapon. And it worked, because when you're on the inside, all you want to do is belong. But it destroys your sense of self in the process. So in reflection, that moment at 18 was one of the first cracks, so to speak. I didn't fully wake up yet, but I remember feeling a shift. And I remember just being, you know, sitting in my first convention as a married woman with my then husband having come with me for his first convention. And I just like had started having my first doubts. I was like, is this actually real? But, you know, like, love shouldn't come with a punishment. No spiritual community or ever any community should ever turn love into shame. But I was still very much a believer, and, you know, it was year 2000, and after all, Armageddon was supposed to be like just around the corner, very imminent. And quite frankly, I just didn't want to be destroyed because I believed it. So I quickly suppressed my doubts, silenced any questioning, and just continued like a good little soldier. And before, obviously, I go to talk on what happened when I eventually got divorced 14 years later, I'm going to share in more detail what life was like after being recruited as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, basically what's behind the facade of the nice witnesses knocking on your door. So in my next episode, I will talk more about the little awakenings, you know, the moments that made me question more and more if this was truly the truth, as they call their view the truth. In conclusion, if you've been quietly punished or raised by religion or community, please know you're not alone. And I want to thank you for being here and listening to this. And if you like what I share, you know, subscribe. And, you know, like, just remember your voice matters too. Your story matters. So I will see you next time. Thank you for watching. Bye.